Thank you so much, Demetrius, and good afternoon, everyone. And as Demetrius so eloquently placed, my name is Monica Keys. I am employed with TIAA, and I'm a certified financial planner. And in my role at TIAA, I serve as a regional financial planning manager, and my main role and mission is to support our advisors as we guide our participants to and through retirement. I've been at TIAA for 8 years, and I've been inside of the industry for over 13 years. So I'm so very excited today to share healthy financial habits to take control of your financial future, to manage money and debt in 5 steps, and to set the foundation for a year of transformation and impact for you. So, as I mentioned before, healthy habits are the foundation to gaining control. Those habits should allow you to enjoy life today and create a solid foundation for your future. In some instances, getting financial control may seem impossible. However, it is my hope that by the end of today's session, no matter your specific situation, you will be able to develop basic day to day financial skills to enable you to take greater control. So, as I mentioned before, we have 5 steps that we're going to explore today in further detail, but I just want to share with you those 5 steps ahead of spending time on each of them individually. So, step one is going to be spending prioritization. Step two is spending plan creation. Step three is knowing how to use debt wisely. Step four is debt control. And last but not least, step five is building your credit score. So before we jump into these 5 steps, I want to share with you some data. It may actually surprise you, these statistics here, but what we did is we surveyed some Americans and we wanted to find out a few things. More specifically, first, how comfortable are you retiring and having enough money to live in retirement? 73% of individuals are at least somewhat confident in their ability to retire in retirement and have enough money for them to live off of. Now, 73% seems like a great statistic, and it is. But also, one thing to consider, and what the statistic is telling us as well, is just a little over a fourth people are not confident in retiring and having enough money to take them through retirement. On top of confidence, personal savings rates is at a near record low at 2.3%. It's dropped to after experiencing an all-time high during the pandemic. A lot of the reasons I can attribute to this decrease could be high cost and inflation. And last but not least, of those individuals that say debt is a problem, 80% of them have identified debt as a significant problem, with the top 3 sources of debt being credit card, medical and health expenses, and student loan debt. So I just want you to take some time to think about those statistics and why it's so important that we make sure that we are having healthy habits when it comes to personal finance. And this is one of the sole reasons I'm so passionate about empowering you to take and maintain financial control. So, as we think about in the previous slide, some of those statistics, we have here on the slide primary financial concerns. Some, all, or may resonate with you, but I want to hear from you. If you could leverage the chat, let me know. Is there anything here that resonates with you? Is there something that's missing? Because we're going to address a lot of these topics in our webinar today. I love it. Some of the key things that I'm seeing so far is debt, which is actually 2 out of our 5 goals. So I love it. We're definitely going to touch on that. Anything else? All right, so debt still is a top contender there, which is great. So let's move on to step one. When you think about your personal expenses, everything is really set up in these different categories. So as you look at these categories and you start to think about housing and utility, food and clothing, and those types of things, I'm interested, just a rhetorical question. Think about these expenses. Are your expenses so evenly allocated as you see here on the screen? Or do you tend to see one, two, or maybe three categories that take up or would make up a large percentage of the wheel? It's okay. It's no right or wrong answer. And I'm sure if we actually surveyed everyone, no one would have the exact expenses and or expense breakdown because we have different priorities and hobbies and interests and additional factors that attribute to how we spend. But ultimately, we only have so much money that comes in, so our spending choices are all about trade-offs. So I'm going to test your knowledge here or your ability to recall information from a previous slide. Does anybody remember from those 8 categories we saw on the prior slide what the 8th and final category was? Feel free to type it into the chat. If you are thinking, I'm going to give you a hint. You can see the actual first 3 words in this slide represent that last category. So if you guess saving for retirement, then yes, you are correct. Many people, especially when they're first starting off their career, don't place much emphasis on saving for retirement. And it could be for numerous reasons. You feel that you're further away from retirement, you'll have time to save later. It's not really important. So you say, when I make more, when I'm earning more, I'll think about it then. I'll be more ready to do it. Well, I can tell you, you will never feel ready. And the time when you start to make more money, I assure you, you'll probably start to spend more money as well. Some employers offer pensions to help supplement or provide income in retirement, but those options and offerings have declined significantly. So that places a greater responsibility on you to save for retirement. Retirement income opportunities may be available with a pension or Social Security. However, those sources may not always be enough to cover the total costs that you may need in retirement, resulting in additional income. So you may ask yourself, Monica, how do I cover the gap if pension and Social Security is not enough? We rely on compounded earnings to save for retirement. So compounded earnings are earnings from the investments in your retirement plan, since solely your contributions would not be enough to build a balance for you in retirement. So how does this work? So glad that you asked. That's what we have this illustration here for. So when you think about compounding interest, when your investments earn money, your balance goes up. You begin earning not just on your contributions, but also on your earnings. So yes, your earnings are earning earnings. And over time, your balance adds up to be more and more beyond your initial contributions. But the most important component here is time. So you need to make sure you have time for your earnings to grow so you can benefit from a long period of time and have the greatest potential for savings for you moving into retirement. So as we look here at this chart, we can see if you were to save $500 a month for over 20 years and assume that that investment growed at 6% per year, your total savings, which is this dark blue line in 20 years, would represent just north of $220,000. Now, for comparison, because we mentioned your contributions may not be enough to fund your retirement. So we can see this yellow line represents solely contributions are $120,000. So what that means is you have over $100,000 in compounded earnings. That is why you save as much as you can, as early as you can, and if you wait, it could cost you more. So if we look here to the far right, if we waited 1 year, we would forfeit the $6,000 in contributions plus north of $12,000 in compounded earnings. So it results in that 1 year delay, a reduction of $18,000. And if you wait longer, then you have to set aside more money to reach the same savings amount. So if we look at this light blue line, a 5 year delay, you would actually lose out on about $80,000. So that 5 year delay would give you, for those 15 years after you took that 5 year pause, you would look at 139,000 versus the 220,000 if you were contributing all 20 years. Now, I just want to point out this chart is hypothetical, and actual results and growth would depend on factors including market performance. However, I cannot stress enough the power of compounding and how it helps you to have more money at retirement. Now, I want to take a pause because this is such an important concept and see if there are any questions thus far about compounded earnings. All right, I see nothing in the chat, so we'll keep the party going here. So prioritizing savings can be accomplished by creating a spending plan, also known as a budget. My preference is to call it a spending plan, however. But there are major benefits to having a spending plan because it allows for you to uncover money that you could possibly allocate to other expenses, do so more confidently and have knowledge about your spending. And it could also help you have willpower in those moments of weaknesses with specific purchases. Now that we know and understand the power of a spending plan, let's talk about how you actually set that up, which is step 2, creating a spending plan. This starts with documenting what you're spending now. You may be very surprised to learn what and how you're spending and where you can possibly trim spending for savings and other goals. Now, TIAA does have a spending plan, which you can see the image here to the right. That is available. It's an interactive standalone PDF document that you can save to your desktop to update as needed. We will share this with Demetrius so that he can share with each of you so that you can have access to that PDF as well. But when it comes to the documentation, what you want to do is you want to make sure you look 6 to 12 months of your spending habits across your bank and your credit card statements to average what you're spending in those categories that you saw previously. As you're taking inventory of your spending, you also want to be mindful of what expenses are essential, you just can't live without, and what items are discretionary. Nice to haves, but if you needed to sacrifice or forfeit them, you could. After completion of your expenses, you would then move to the income section. And this is where you would enter all of your income sources. And the worksheet, as I mentioned before, is interactive. So it actually will adjust to show you what percentage of your income is being allocated to those different goals, which is essential in being able to identify where you can trim and implement change should you need to. When you think about prioritization, it really is thinking about what's most important to you from a spending standpoint and what you're willing to trade to have those. So maybe it's coffee from your favorite place every other day instead of every day so that you can attend that concert for your favorite band or artist. You can even find ways to reduce or eliminate expenses to free up money. So reviewing your essential bills like your insurance, your phone, television, and internet to look for ways to cut back by inquiring about lower or more affordable options or possibly switching to a competitor for a better rate. Monthly subscriptions or memberships are ideal to evaluate to determine if services are still needed, if they're duplicated, or if they're available at a reduced cost elsewhere. Overall, scaling back or less expensive options in clothing, home and car repairs, and vacation can also be helpful. The spending plan works for now. However, As your expenses and your goals change, you can always revamp the spending plan and or have several versions of it to accommodate what you're looking to accomplish. Thank you, Alexandria, for sharing that document in the chat. I want to pause for a second and see what questions you have about the spending plan and or the document that Alexandria provided. All right, no questions. So after reviewing your current spending and your income, next up is to really think about some of those targeted spending areas for the purposes of goals. I know your plan is going to be personalized for you. However, there are a few guidelines centered around certain expenses. So definitely, we talked about the importance of compounded earnings and how savings is so important to create retirement income. So we want to make sure that you're aiming to save 10 to 15% of your retirement income, and that can include employer matches and contributions. If you currently are not at 10 to 15%, it's okay because life happens. To know better is to do better. So try to work up towards that 10 to 15%, but do as much as you can and increase it over time until you get to the targeted 10 to 15%. Next is housing. Housing can be a very large monthly expense, whether you're buying or renting, but it should not prevent you from saving. But when you think about housing expense all in, you're really thinking about your insurance, association, utilities, furnishings, improvements, repairs, cleanings, so on and so forth. So ideally, you should target between 28 to 35% of your gross income as your cap for expenses for housing. Now, I know we gave you some guidelines here, but I don't want you to get discouraged. Enjoyment of life while you work is the well-being part of financial well-being. So a spending plan is not about taking the fun out of life, but rather balancing the fun now to make sure there is fun now and fun for later. So next up is after you have the spending plan, this is where you put it into practice. And it can take some time. So some of the best practices are to save your receipts, give yourself grace. It may not work out the way it was intended to when you initially set up, but that's okay. You want to continue to see what works, go back to that PDF document and assess and make changes until you get it right. And then also be mindful. You may have to reassess your trade offs. Maybe I thought I could do these things or would be willing to give up these expenses, but I'm not. And if I'm not, then where am I willing to trim that expense elsewhere to create room for it? It's all about balance. Additionally, TIAA offers our participants a 360 financial view, and it's a resource that allows for you to track and view all of your financial accounts in one place, as well as keep up with your budgets and your expenses. Next step is step 3. That is use of debt wisely. Now, a spending plan is all well and good, but if you're struggling with debt, it could definitely undermine and possibly derail your entire spending plan. So things to remember about debt is it can get you into a lot of trouble, but when used responsibly, it's a very important financial tool, and it can help you pay for things in the short term without undermining our long-term finances. And it can also help you build a great credit rating, which lets you borrow in the future with a much lower interest rate. However, when you think about debt, it may begin to become problematic when you find that maybe you are finding it challenging to make your monthly payments, you're paying just the minimum payment on your credit cards, or your overall debt is greater than 30%, 36% of your income. Now, I want to point out there are 2 types of debt, revolving and non-revolving. Revolving debt, an example of that would be credit cards. It's a continuous loan that's always available. It doesn't have a start and an end date, hence revolving like a revolving door. But with the revolving debt, there there's a credit limit with no set repayment period. And once that debt is paid off, you can continue to use it. Now, because of this, interest rates you pay are typically higher and can be variable to fluctuate with economic conditions. And typically, there's just a low minimum monthly payment associated with it. Non-revolving debt, on the other end, is more of a open door, closed door type of situation. So one-time loan, once that loan is paid off and you're paying that in a fixed amount of time with fixed monthly payments, it's a done deal. So because of that, you tend to have a lower interest rate, and you may find that interest is deductible on your taxes. Now, we talked earlier about the power of compounding interest, but it can actually work against you when it comes to credit cards. So when you think about credit cards, they are easy because it allows for us to spend beyond our means and hold that debt for a long period of time. And while it can be convenient, it can come at a huge price. Credit card debt is the opposite of power of combining. If you don't pay it off every month, the interest on your balance is compounding daily. The longer you carry the balance, the more and more your interest adds up, and it can be beyond the annual rate. The rates are not fixed, rising with the worst of times, thinking about the economic conditions, therefore pushing you further and further into debt. That is why paying the minimum balance on your credit card is not a good long-term financial strategy. Those minimums are not enough to pay off credit in any reasonable amount of time. Let's take a look at an example. Let's say you charge $2,500 for your favorite item or something that was on your want list for Christmas because Christmas just passed, and you purchase that at $2,500 on a credit card, the 19.8 APR, and you're paying the minimum payment, which is 2% of the outstanding balance. It would take you 31 years to pay off that account, and that's if you made no additional charges. So over that 31 years, you would have paid principal plus an additional interest of $8,201. That's a total repayment, $10,701. Now that's awesome for the credit card company, but that's not awesome as the credit card holder. So that is an example of the power of compounding working against you. Think of how many other $2,500 purchases you could have made for the $10,701 that you spent. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. What questions do you have so far about the power of compounding working against you, but for the benefit of credit card companies? All right. Still see no questions? That means I must be doing a pretty good job here. But honestly, folks, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. It can be this slide or any previous slide. Now let's talk about non-revolving debt. It's generally less problematic in terms of high compounding interest because it doesn't push you as further and further into debt, but it can have its own set of pitfalls. The biggest thing is really, can you afford to take on the debt? Has anyone ever heard of the term house poor? What it means is really you've taken on a home, probably a really good home, really nice home actually, but there's not enough money for much else. So while it references home in the term, it can be associated with anything else. Yes, I see Myron mentioned saving for retirement. Also beware of variable interest rates. When you think about the adjustable rate mortgages, they can be enticing because you have this introductory low interest rate, but then they can be subject to a rate change later that you may not be able to afford. So consider fixed rate mortgages that you can afford and won't change. However, if you do, or if you are looking towards an adjustable rate mortgage, think about if this is a short-term housing option where you could sell the home if the rate were to move significantly, or if it's a longer term housing option, consider to refinance before the rate moves. However, if you refinance later, you could be subject to whatever the interest rates may be at that time. Also, as I mentioned before, you could be eligible for tax deductibility on your mortgage and your student loans. So this still can be a responsible way to manage your debt and part of a healthy part of your financial life. All right, and I'm going to pause for a second because I see a question. What are your thoughts on utilizing balance transfers for managing credit card debt? That is a great question. When you think about our next step, and that's a great setup, Latoya, for our next step, getting your debt under control. So I'm going to address your question here in the slide. So when you think about debt control, it all starts with identifying your outstanding debts. So you want to make sure you know the total balance and the interest rate. You can request a free credit report online to make sure you're aware of outstanding debts and accounts in your name. Once you have obtained that information, you then want to organize those debts and look into being able to receive lower interest rates and consolidating them into as fewer debts as possible with lower interest rates if possible. So to address your question, Latoya, some of the tips for doing that would be to tackle bills with a higher interest rate first, contacting lenders, credit card providers to see if they can lower your rate or give you a special offer to help you out, and also looking into balance transfer offers with the 0% interest rate. That would allow for you to move that balance with interest to another card to pay that off with the 0% interest rate. But you still want to make sure that you have a strategy to pay that off, because if you don't pay that off in the terms of that 0% balance transfer, you still will find yourself with that balance still paying on that balance plus the interest that the credit card company is charging. Thanks for your comment, Latoya. And then also overall, you can look into consolidating your high interest debt into a personal loan with a lower interest rate. But then most importantly, once you look to find out what your payments would be with the lower interest rate or the debt consolidation, you also want to be mindful that this now becomes an expense. So that means you need to return back to your spending plan and build in that expense to your spending plan. And that's where, if that's not done, it can derail your plan because now you have an additional expense that hasn't been factored in. So that would derail your spending and everything that you have set. So you want to make sure that as you're doing that, you are factoring in those debt payments, building them in as well. Any other questions in regards to debt control? All right, so on the topic of debt, let's talk about student loan debt. That was one of the top 3 when we looked at the statistic about debt. So when you think about student loan debt, it can be a huge problem for many people. TIAA does offer an online solution with Savvy that may be available with your retirement plan if you have one, but it's designed to help nonprofit and government employees take advantage of public service loan forgiveness programs. If you're unsure if that's available and Savvy is not an option, you could always reach out to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program itself to see if you qualify on your own. And if not, you can always look into the possibility of consolidation at a lower rate at the shortest, most affordable repayment period for yourself. That's going to require you to go back to that spending plan to look to see what works for you expense-wise so that you would then be able to commit to a repayment plan. Right? So step 5 is going to be about building your credit. So we've talked a lot about how to pay off your debt, but the goal is not necessarily to not have debt. Having debt and managing it wisely is so important for your credit score. So the credit score tells financial institutions how much of a financial risk you are, and that affects how much you can borrow as well as your payment terms. So the better your score, the better deal that you'll get. And when you think about credit card application, it's not just mortgage and car loan. Your score is also used by landlords for you to rent, insurance companies for your insurance quote, and even employers during the hiring process. So checking your credit score regularly to make sure it's accurate. As I mentioned before, you can obtain one free credit report each year from the 3 credit card agencies, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, by way of annualcreditreport.com. I suggest pulling all 3 of them together so that you can look at that information, verify the information is accurate, and also contest any information that may be inaccurate and go through the dispute process. Your credit report lists your bill payment history, your loans, your current debt, other financial information, and it even shows where you work and live and if you've ever been sued, arrested, or filed for bankruptcy. While the score ranges from 300 to 850, ideally 700 or more is considered to be favorable. So I know we've talked a little bit about the better your score, the better your options, so on and so forth. However, when you think about your credit score, we know there's this range, 700 or more is preferred, but I think the breakdown is very important. So if you look here to the right, you can see that there are 5 pieces of criteria that make up your credit score, and they're ranked from its impact on your score from the most greatest to the least greatest. So payment history is the first one. It's 35% of that total score. And one missed payment is one of the biggest factors that can affect your credit score. And a late payment can stay on your credit report for up to 7 years. So be mindful when it comes to your payments. If you have an app or a calendar, schedule a day or 2 ahead. Some banks and lenders, they will ask you if you want the alerts a few days before the due date, but consider leveraging them to make sure that your payments are on time. The next biggest one is credit usage. This is how much credit you are using compared to the credit limit. So the more you use, the lower your score. So thinking about if you're maxing out that card, then that can contribute to a lower score. Experts generally recommend that you have no more than 30% of the limit, and for the very best credit score, not to exceed 90% of the limit. Next up is length of credit history. The longer you have credit history in good standing, the better the score. So even if you have no debt and are great with money, you may want to open a credit card and pay off the balance every month just to establish good credit, and it represents 15% of your score. Now, the last 2 are tied for recent activity and types of credit. Recent activity relates to how many new accounts you've opened recently. So opening too many accounts can negatively affect your score. So only apply for new credit when you need it. And I know it can be really tempting sometimes to go to the register and you hear the associate say, you can save another 20% today on your purchase if you open a new account at our store. Just remember and be mindful of how many other new accounts you've opened recently, because it may not be worth the 5 to 10 point hit to your credit to save the 20%. And last but not least, successfully manage different types of credit accounts. So as I mentioned before, there are 2 types of credit. You have revolving and you have non-revolving. So maintaining a healthy balance between the 2 is going to contribute to having a better score and or a good score. So I saw here 2 questions. One was, should you move the credit card payment once you pay off debt to another credit card to pay it down? Absolutely. So if you were paying $100 a month and then you've paid off credit card 1, and you now have an extra $100 amount because credit card 1 is paid off, absolutely. You repurpose that money to credit card 2, so you pay credit card 2 down faster. Because remember in that slide with the power of the compounding for the sake of the credit card company, the longer you hold that credit, the more money that you are paying. So absolutely reallocate that money. And I see another question here. What's the philosophy behind why credit score is increasing? If you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, I'm assuming, are you referring to the score itself?
Yeah. I'm just interested. At one point, it was like 720, 750 was really, really high. Now we're at 850. Look like it's going, north of maybe 1,000 at one time. So yeah, that's what I was just interested in why
Mhm.
those things are that particular your credit score is increasing.
Yeah, so a lot of that has a lot to do with the national average. So if you think about the score, if the national average is 600 or 625, and you start to see the national average move north, from a lending standpoint, there now is a greater percentage of individuals who now may qualify. So in order to kind of, you think about maybe a little bit moving the finish line to some extent, so that from a lender standpoint, they are assessing the risk, and if they see that the median has shifted, now they now start to have a tighter criteria and move that expectation as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Oh yeah, of course. Great questions on guys. I really appreciate it. Are there any other questions? I can take them chat or live. Continue thinking about those questions. Now, just a few good best practices I always like to share. When you think about managing debt, like one of the things that's very important is creation of an emergency fund. Think of it as your safety net. It can help you from pulling out that credit card with that high interest rate when unexpected things happen, because life happens. Your car breaks down, it's a rather costly expense. You lose your job temporarily, and then you may be inclined to make that charge on the credit card with the higher interest rates and or dip into your retirement savings. So ideally, a rule of thumb, 6 months of expenses saved is ideal. And if that's something that you do not have, think about how to put that into your spending plan so you can make that one of your savings goals so that you can work towards that 6 months of expenses for you. Now, if you spend all this time putting together a spending plan, you've worked hard for it, you've created it to get financially healthier. Excuse me. So make sure you follow it. Continue to review and adjust if you need to, and charge only what you can pay off each month. We mentioned before the credit is important. So making sure that you are not biting off more than you can chew is going to be helpful, because as we know, we're just paying the credit card company to carry that debt for a little bit longer, and they are benefiting from that and not you. So make sure you're being mindful of that and consider alternatives. When it comes to making a large purchase, do you absolutely need this purchase? Is there a cheaper alternative, or could you live without it? Could you delay it and save for it? And also, is there a payment plan that will allow for you not to leverage credit? So some places will allow for you to pay it off in 90 days, especially when you think about medical bills. Most medical entities will offer up some payment plan should you have an expense. I see a great question. Bobby, you mentioned primary expenses, housing, utility, transportation, and food. Want to elaborate on that a little bit? Feel free to come off mute, Bobby, if you can.
Hello. Yeah. Um. So yeah, and actually, give me just 1 second here.
Mhm. That's
Um.
fine. While Bobby is taking a few moments, I'll talk about the last bullet, which is really just making sure that you pay off balances as soon as you possibly can. As I mentioned before, life happens. Sometimes you have to use debt, and that's fine. Just make sure that if you make that charge on the high interest balance, you have a plan and a strategy to be able to pay that off. But we've already covered and talked about, we're going to bake that into our spending plan. If we have to use it, then we're going to allow for that to be an expense. We're going to bake it in and we're going to have a strategy to pay it off as soon as possible so that we can cover that expense and move forward.
Okay. Thanks for being patient with me. Yeah, so the primary expenses, going back to when you said it's encouraging everyone to have at least 6 months worth of expenses saved. I was just extending that from my point of view. The 6 months worth of expenses saved should be the primary expenses that are needed, to basically to live. So with the housing, utilities, because you need lights to cook,
Mhm.
to have warmth, to have coolness if you live in extremely hot temperatures, and transportation. Because and you can let me know how what everyone thinks about this, how you think about this. Because initially when I used to hear that advice about having it saved, I was thinking that all expenses, every category I have for my monthly budget. But then I realized, and it was someone, I heard someone else's perspective, and it's just like, oh, it's the necessities,
Mhm.
the strict necessities to get you to the next point. Because ideally, that's a fallback. So if
Mhm.
there's usually it's going to be some sort of financial emergency that causes you have to, use those expenses. So ideally, you're looking forward to being back on track financially about that time, or at least having some more income come in, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I was meaning by that.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying that, Bobby. You are absolutely correct. When you think about your emergency fund, it is the essentials. So I like to think of housing, utilities, those types of things. If you needed to cut, cable or internet or those types of things, those are the things we could live without need be, but we absolutely need housing, utilities, food, things of that nature. So absolutely, having this 6 months. So I'd say 6 months of essential, if you want to create a buffer and try to account for some of those additional expenses, like maybe it's transportation or car insurance, so on and so forth. Yes, you could absolutely do those things, but bare bones minimum is those essential expenses. And as I mentioned before, maybe if you have that bonus that comes in from work, or you've worked some overtime, if that allows, if your work is set up and you are hourly and you're able to do so, but any of those extra pieces, that come in, consider saving a portion of those income sources as well to pinch off of and put towards the emergency fund if you wanted to buffer and have a little bit more. But absolutely bare bones minimum are those primary expenses. Anyone else have any comments or details they'd like to add?
So I'll just go in and add something else that helps me from time to time. And right now I'm on this call because it's time for me to get back on track. I slipped away. That tends to happen in life. But with that being said, when using my credit card, I have adopted the philosophy of I need to see the money coming in before I spend more.
Mhm.
So not booking, let's just say, a trip that's $2,500 when I know my upcoming income, because I'm already working off a budget. I only really have like 1,500 to spare, so it's working
Mhm.
within those realm, and making sure to pay that, like as you mentioned before, paying before the due date, within every bill cycle, every 30 days, is essential to one, keeping oneself from incurring more debt. And then two, it also just really helps, like you said, the aspects of the payment. I mean, your credit. That's the way your credit is scored. So yeah, it's just helped me. It gets really hard, very, 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 very hard because it's so enticing to know, well, hey, I have this line of credit that's, thousands of dollars, so why limit myself? But why limit myself? Because in the end, it's the piece. Yeah, you can spend it up. Yeah, there's a credit score. But as we continue to live toward retirement, work toward retirement, the idea is to come out of it and not owing, and not owing so much, or as owing as little as possible. So that helps me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I 100% agree with you. Definitely, as I mentioned before, credit cards companies love to give out credit, right? Because as we looked in that illustration, that $2,500 trip, if you pay the minimum payment, it'll take you 31 years to pay it off, and you would have spent $10,000, right? So it's very important, and it takes discipline to be able to recognize that. And, I want to give you a hats off and, huge kudos for being able to say, I know where I am and I know where I need to be, because that is the first step, right? That is how you get where you want to be. So good for you. I encourage you to continue to stay disciplined. The spending plan is awesome. It sounds like you have one or a version of it, which is great. But, continue to work the steps. It will only be temporarily.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything they'd like to share?
And I'm going to say one more thing. I don't mean to dominate this call, y'all, but chime in. But one more thing that I find is a beneficial piece of information is, if you have room for it, I assume most of us or all of us are working full time. If you have room for it, pick up a part-time job. If you find yourself binge watching hours of TV every night, most nights of the week, or doing just things that, basically you're not earning any money while you're doing that, I strongly encourage you to pick up a part-time job. You can do 15 hours a week, 10 hours a week, do some deliveries, like fast food, DoorDash, Uber Eats, etc., Instacart. Just do it, because for me, multiple streams of income is just it's rewarding. I mean, it's necessary to an extent, but it's just very rewarding to know, okay, I still have some more money coming in every week. Like, even if it's just $20 from, oh, I did 2 Instacarts yesterday, so I know next week I have at least another $20 that's going to be deposited into my account. So I strongly encourage you, especially if you're only doing like 40, 45 hours a week and work 50, 60. Make use of your time. And then if you are in positions where you're like, a homeowner, or you're working on, you have certain crafts or hobbies or things that you like to engage in, if you pick up a part-time job, let's say you're not working for yourself, you've worked for yourself, that's fine too. If you can pick up a part-time job that allows you to receive a discount for the thing that you love the most, that's a bonus. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm done.
multiple streams of income is amazing. And to your point, there are so many jobs that they're like, you can be remote, you can work from home, right? So if you don't want to get out, or you want to stay in the comforts of your home, there are lots of remote options where you can take customer service part-time and do a few hours. But definitely, that's how you tackle your plan. And if you can bring in those additional income sources, it helps you pay down things faster, clear your debt, or save. So definitely.
Monica, I got a quick question.
Yes.
I've heard this before, but I don't know. What's your thoughts? Split payments on, like you do it with your mortgage. Say, you do two, it's the same payment, but you just split it up and you save on the interest. Does that work with credit card debt as well? That same.
It can.
Mm,
It can help with credit card debt. So with credit cards, there's a closing date. The closing date is the date that they report to the credit agency. So, paying above and beyond or splitting the payment would be helpful, because every month, as we mentioned before, your credit usage is determined based on what your balance is and how much you've utilized of that. So since we know that's a criteria of the score, it can help reduce the score for you.
Okay.
Mhm. Great question.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, we have had some great conversation today. You guys have asked amazing questions, but I just want to recap before we wrap up today, and just talk more about the 5 steps. So, we had great conversation today. We learned how to prioritize our spending, create a spending plan. You have a PDF resource for you that's available. We talked a little bit about the usage of debt wisely, and then also debt control. And last but not least, credit score, the components and how to build a healthy credit score. So I just want to let you know, TIAA is here, no matter your background, your income, or financial circumstance. If you're a participant, you can always reach out and speak with a TIAA financial consultant. And if you enjoyed today's webinars and you'd like to learn more about upcoming webinars that we have on demand, feel free to check out our webinar link where you can see presentations, much like today. We record a lot of them, so they'll be there for you. Now we have roughly about 6 minutes left. So I wanted to just let you know, if you want to connect with us and you're interested in future job opportunities, I want to put the QR code up so you could snap a picture of that if you're interested. And then I wanted to also just say, on behalf of TIAA and myself, we would like to thank the National Black MBA Association Dallas-Fort Worth chapter for allowing me to come today and share steps pertaining to financial control. I hope this has been insightful for you. I want to wish you a very happy and prosperous new year. And I hope that, this will be you possess and have the most financial control in this year than you've ever had previously.